Hey VC, it's Nico back again at you with another vinyl update and recent spins. It's vacation and guess what? I'm spinning records. Wait a minute. I don't know if the music's too loud or if you can hear it in the background, but it's one heck of a record I will show later on in the video. I got some recent records coming in the mail, nothing too big, and I got a couple of singles I'd like to show you, which I pulled from my shelf. And one special 45 which I received for Christmas from my girlfriend, and of course a couple of grails which I have managed to pick up the last few days. So let's just dig into the pile. Nothing spectacular in these records which came in the mail today, but good records nevertheless. First off, it's the first record by Quicksilver Messenger Service, their self-titled debut album. A little bit of glare there to show the foil stamp. The debut album from 1968. And remember, a while back I showed a couple of other Quicksilver Messenger Service records, I believe from Shady Grow and upwards in the discography. And man, I wasn't impressed by those records. Okay, they're a good band, but not quite to my taste. But I went ahead and listened to their first album online, and man, that is a killer record, I think. On the original Capital Rainbow label, with an inner sleeve, with adverts for super poster giant size. Perhaps I should fill in that form and check if I get a poster. I guess it's too late. Almost 50 years on. Man, this first Quicksilver Messenger Service record that's quite another deal than the later ones. This is really good. Okay, it has a couple of fillers perhaps. Not fillers, but not quite to my taste, but the closing track on side 2, what's it called? The Fool, 12 minutes. Man, that's just a Psych out. Just fantastic. And John Cipollina's guitar work. Man, he was excellent. It's a shame he's gone. Next up, a quite ordinary record, which I, for some reason, sold off years ago, but had a craving for Santana the other day, and you can always find Santana Abraxas, no problem there. A cool original US issue on the Columbia label, yes. What's funny about this one is not the original in the sleeve, that's not funny, but what was funny as a bonus is that it contained the original poster, and I never seen that in person before. So, that was a good bonus to a cheap and ordinary, but mind you, excellent record. I do like Santana's first 2 albums, the self-titled debut and the Abraxas, and Santana 3 is good as well, but from there and on I jump off the Santana wagon. I also picked up a nice reissue copy from the 80s, I think, just a cheapo reissue of Status Quo's first album, Picturesque, Match-Stickable Messages from the Status Quo. I already have the American version, Messages from Status Quo, on a cadet concept, but as Ron from the Hogs Air Report pointed out to me, it was fake stereo. So I took a chance on this one, hoping it was the mono issue, and it certainly was. So an 80s cheap reissue with the mono versions of the first Status Quo songs, or album if you wish. And I honestly don't know why, but this is quite overlooked as a Psych album or Psych piece. This is, for me, the best Status Quo. Quite good songwriting and excellent British sounding psychedelia. So I was quite pleased to find a cheap mono reissue of that one. In my last video I showed my Under the Radar albums video. I showed Argent's first, and I think the day after, the second album showed up from 1970, and it's called Ring of Hands. It's an original issue on the UK issue on the Epic label. And it's quite funny because I have never seen that one in the wild. It's not rare or anything, but you rarely see those earliest Argent albums in the wild, especially here in Norway anyway. Haven't had the chance to listen to it yet, but if it's anyway near as good as the first, it should be an enjoyable listen. Also picked up a cheap 90s reissue of Yardbird's Little Games, and just because it has some alternative versions here, both Goodnight Sweet Josephine versions are on this one, both the US and UK, and an earlier version of Think About It, which is my favorite Yardbirds track. So, a nice cheap pickup. Another cheap pickup is the nice self-titled third album, I believe, from 1969. And these can be found quite cheap. That's rarely in this condition. Flimsy paper on the cover, which often seems to be quite worn. If this is an original or a reissue on the immediate label, I don't know, and I don't care, because quite frankly, getting first pressings of the nice isn't that important to me. But this is a good album. It has the track Diary of an Empty Day on here, and for example. And of course the B-side is a live recording, and the nice were always better live than in the studio. Their albums are good but quite sketchy sounding. This sounds good, but the first two albums have varying sound quality. Well, that was the recent pickups. Ordinary, cheap, good records. Cheers. And I picked up two grails, of course. I always seem to pick up those grails, that endless grail list of mine. First off, I want to show a Norwegian free jazz trio called Svein Finnerud Trio. And I managed to track down an unplayed copy of this album, which is from 1970. And man, the Norwegian free jazz, avant-garde jazz scene from the late 60s, early 70s in Norway was crazy experimental. And this record is no exception. On the original Sonnet label, and the record is in pristine shape. So quite pleased to pick that one up. Perhaps I'll give it a needle drop. A little needle drop of Svein Finnerud Trio. Perhaps not the first track, which is quite conventional. I can play a little bit of that as well, but it wouldn't be representative of the rest of the record. As you might hear, first track is very melodic, moody, beautiful. It doesn't spill the beans of what's to come. But I can drop the needle elsewhere. Quite experimental, as you might hear. Or not. This is the kind of record which is fairly important to find a mintish copy, because there are so many low places in the music. It's very dynamic, and in some places you almost don't hear anything. So if you had a crackling copy, it would be quite annoying. Well, from Norwegian free jazz to UK/Israeli hard rock. Today I managed to pick up a copy of Jericho, the hard progressive rock album from 1972, and this is supposed to be Jericho in Hebrew. And this band is very interesting actually. It went by numerous names, such as the Churchills, as they were known as locally in Israel, releasing numerous singles and participating in and collaborating in many record releases. And then they released an album internationally in 1970 called Jericho Jones. They switched name from Churchills to Jericho Jones. And then 2 years later, their last LP was released, simply called Jericho. And if you haven't heard this is one for your grail list, because this is such a good album. I think I will call it a great album. It's on the mustard colored A&M label. This is a UK pressing. And I think I'll give it a needle drop instead of trying to describe what it sounds like. You heard it in the background in the beginning of the video, but you can't play enough Jericho. I was so pleased to find this in a record shop here in Norway, but because these don't turn up every day, I can guarantee you that. Let's listen to Jericho. And this will be the track Feather Bed. Cheers!
When I
Well, that's Jericho. Blazing guitars, heavy riffing, just awesome songs on that album. And the opening track on side 2, which is called Justin and Nova, a beautiful 10-minute track which dives into psychedelia, progressive rock, and of course hard and heavy 70s early rock. This is a great album. Well, while Jericho is playing in the background, let me just show some singles I have in my collection. One of my favorite Pink Floyd songs, Point Me at the Sky. This is an Italian reissue single from 1973. Careful with that Axe Eugene on the flip side. And the way to tell that this is a reissue is to look at the back side, which has an ad for Dark Side of the Moon. So, for some reason they thought it was a good idea to promote Dark Side of the Moon with an obscure single track from 1968. Another single I have in my collection is the Danish band Culpeper's Orchard. And this is actually a children's record, even though it doesn't sound like that, but it was made for the children in Denmark in 1971. But it sounds like psychedelic prog. Excellent track on that one. Have a copy of Dogs, Back with Circles, The Who. A nice one there. Deep Purple and Hush and One More Rainy Day. This is a Parlophone single, English. And Deep Purple, Black Knight, Back with Speed King. That's some of the singles from my collection which I have had on rotation today. And for the Christmas gift I was given a nice 45, a big one for me, from my girlfriend. And it's Aunt Mary's second single called Jimmy Janice and Brian, backed with Stop Your Wishful Thinking. Just a heavy hitter on the original Philips label. Am I running out of space? I hope not. And this is in quite good shape, almost like new, from 1971. So, how's that for a girlfriend? I was flabbergasted, to use an odd word. Well, that's all for this episode, guys and girls. Thanks for tuning in. I wish you all a happy new year. If I don't see you before New Year's Eve, I will continue spinning my records, and do check out Jericho. Bye for now.